everything feels broken. Oh, I just offended Justin Trudeau. He gets very angry when I talk about these problems. He thinks that if we don't speak about them out loud, that Canadians will forget that they exist.
Now, there are politicians like Mr. Poilievre who have no real solutions to offer and who just try to exploit the anger and concerns that people do have. The Liberal vision for the future could not be more different than Mr. Poilievre's version.
And we know what you will do this session of Parliament. You will divide to distract. You'll try to make people afraid of each other because you think that if an average Canadian is afraid of his neighbor, he'll forget that he can't feed himself or pay the rent.
Mr. Poilievre was out talking about how we should all invest in Bitcoin to opt out of inflation after he watched videos on YouTube about it.
For the borders that bring in the illegal guns, you are responsible for our national police force. And after 8 years, you have given Canadians cities that are turning into crime zones.
When you twist the facts or make things up for political gain, that's not responsible leadership.
With your $6,000 a night hotel rooms, you've never had it so good yourself, Justin. But let me tell you something, Justin. There is pain in the faces you do not see. There is suffering in the voices you do not hear. And there is distress and even chaos in the places you do not go. If you don't believe me, come with me over to the local grocery store in East End, Ottawa, where I was last night, where a 60-year-old plus cook came up to me with tears in his eyes to tell me he has to delay his retirement. But you know the thing that really broke him? That he can no longer afford the very ingredients to cook at home that he works with in his job at work. Justin, if you don't believe me, come to Northern Ontario and ask the elderly woman who lives in the cold because your carbon tax has made it too expensive for her to heat her home. If you don't believe me, Justin, come speak to the students who live in homeless shelters while they go to school, because the average rent for a one-bedroom apartment in Toronto after 8 years of your leadership is $2,500 a month. That's more than a 100% increase since you took office, and you've done absolutely nothing to incentivize the construction of new and affordable homes for our young people. If you don't believe me, Justin, go to the food banks, where 1.5 million people go to eat in a given month. Stay around long enough. You might hear from some of the people who come to the food bank asking for help getting medical assistance and dying. Not because they're sick, but because they're too poor and too miserable after 8 years of your leadership to go on living like this. If you don't believe me, Justin, go talk to the families of the 30,000 people who've lost a loved one to drug overdoses after you favored policies that flooded our streets with heroin and fentanyl, and you tied the hands of our police and prevented them from doing anything about it. After you failed to hold the scumbag corporations who brought these drugs to our streets accountable. Companies like McKinsey, Mr. Trudeau, companies to whom you continue to give $100 million worth of contracts. Mr. Trudeau, if you don't believe me, go to the now permanent encampments that have taken over large parts of formerly prosperous and bustling communities in our cities like Vancouver, Toronto, and Peterborough. If you don't believe me, take a trip to the city transit, Mr. Trudeau, in Toronto, where 40 homeless people are forced to spend the night because your policies have made it impossible for them to get a home, where crime now rages out of control and women say they're afraid to even get on the train. June 17th, the Toronto TTC, a woman in her 20s, died of her injuries after she was set on fire. December 8th, a fatal stabbing on Line 2 train at High Park Station left a 31-year-old woman dead and injured. The suspect was wielding an ice pick. You don't believe me, Mr. Trudeau? Get on one of those trains and talk to the people who will tell you the story of a woman who was stabbed in the head and face on a Spadina streetcar just south of Bloor Street. She was taken to hospital with life-altering injuries. These are not one-off stories, Justin. Crime is up 32% since you took office. Violent gang crime up 92% after 8 years in office. You are responsible for the criminal code, for the borders that bring in the illegal guns. You are responsible for our national police force. And after 8 years, you have given Canadians cities that are turning into crime zones. This is your record, Mr. Trudeau. Meanwhile, illegal border crossings have exploded, crossings that were almost unheard of when you took office. This is 8 years. You told us that better was always possible, and yet everything is worse, and you blame everyone else.
We all like YouTube, but it matters what content you watch and what you choose to amplify. Mr. Poilievre also used YouTube to court anti-women groups, something he's never apologized for and never explained. Now, he gives speeches to the Frontier Centre in Winnipeg, a group that said that it's a myth that residential schools robbed Indigenous children of their childhood. Not only is that incredibly hurtful, it's just plain wrong. When you twist the facts or make things up for political gain, that's not responsible leadership. Recent studies show that misinformation on COVID has cost hundreds of millions of dollars and thousands of lives. Peddling misinformation and disinformation has serious and devastating consequences. Mr. Poilievre has made a deliberate choice. But we, all of you in this room, have been there day in and day out to deliver for and to reassure our constituents through these tough times by sticking to facts and science. Notre vision et celle de M. Poilievre ne pourrait pas être plus différente. Notre équipe est là pour livrer des résultats pour les Canadiens et c'est exactement ce qu'on va continuer de faire. My friends, the world is facing a moment, and as Liberals and as Canadians and as a country, we must meet it. When Canada participated in the 2 world wars to defend freedom and democracy, the generation of our grandparents and great-grandparents met the moment and we punched above our weight. When, as a country, we face wildfires, floods, ice storms, hurricanes, we're there for one another and we meet the moment. We roll up our sleeves and rebuild what was lost bigger and stronger. When millennials graduated into the Great Recession in 2008, they got creative and they showed amazing and incredible resilience. When we were at the height of the pandemic, Canadians looked out for one another. I know we all want to forget about that pandemic. I get it. But as we get a little distance, I'm hearing more and more reflections on the early days of it, of how we were there for each other. We should remember, all of us, when we were all in this together, when everyone had signs up in their windows, when people were making noise and honking in support of our frontline health workers, not against them. Continuons d'être là les uns pour les autres. Continuons de travailler avec les faits et de se fier à la science. Continuons d'être ambitieux pour ce pays. J'ai hâte à la rentrée parlementaire la semaine prochaine pour continuer de travailler avec vous pour livrer la marchandise pour les Canadiens. We need your best ideas. We need your best efforts. We need you to keep stepping up in your communities. To this incredible team, thank you. You're all working the ground hard to get yourselves nominated once again, because we're in a minority parliament and we need to be ready for anything. So stay close to your communities and keep bringing their voices to Parliament. And let's continue to be the voice for Canadians. Let's continue to fight for families. Let's continue to fight for patients and healthcare workers. Let's continue to fight for facts and science and truth. Let's continue to fight for people who still feel left behind. My friends, let's continue doing this work for Canadians.